I'd like to welcome to the stage, and I want to just say one thing about RPO before we start. RPO is a platform product. All of these companies do much, much more than RPO today. All right, so it's sort of an acronym everyone's used to. But these are all really talent management service providers, and RPO is one of the many solutions they offer. I think that's important. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Alex Onofrio, from the Client Services Director from Korn Ferry Future Step. Dance your way up here, Alex, doing the Future Step. Steve Leach, who is the Sector Leader and Head of the Americas for Alexander Mann Solutions. Seb O'Connell, the Managing Director of Europe and APAC for Cielo. John Wilson, who's the CEO of Wilson HCG. And Michael Yinger, who's the Global Leader of Growth and Strategy for PeopleScout. So come on up, folks. AMS figures they can take extra time because they rank #1 everywhere. All right, come on, Steve, sit down. Okay, so the first question is one about, and I touched on this briefly in my address last night for those of you who were at the dinner. It's about everyone's favorite, sort of combined new word, Brexit. Okay, a marvelous move, I might add. So let's start off with this. As we approach Brexit, which everyone here is trying to figure out what to do because it's such a nebulous thing. And one of the things that's interesting, and I just want to mention this in case, I know all of you know this. Last year, the Republic of Ireland traded mostly with the US, 38 billion. Next in line, it was with the UK at 16 billion. And when you go down to third, it's like falling off a cliff. So here in Ireland, this is going to be a big deal. So the question is, as we approach Brexit, what is your company recommending to your affected clients about mobility and cross-border recruitment? It's a really hard question, so we always start with Seb with the really hard questions. Seb O'Connell, Cielo.
Great, yeah, thanks, Elliot. Start with the politics. Before I start, I think I should probably say and speak on behalf of all the providers here, we do a lot better on diversity for our clients than we do on the panel. For next year, Elliot, we should probably sort that out. In terms of Brexit, we don't really know what's going to happen over the next kind of 18 months or so. And so when you start talking about giving advice, it's very difficult and complex because we don't necessarily want to be stepping into the political sphere. I think what we are talking most to our customers about is what do we do over the next 18 months rather than what you do over the next 5 years beyond that. And I think a lot of that is how you're dealing with retention and employee engagement rather than what you're doing with recruitment. And I think that's really important because what we've done is politically we've kind of stepped off the edge slightly and we don't really know what it means. And so what you really need to think about is how does everyone feel now, not necessarily what's going to happen in 18 months' time. And so we're spending a lot of time talking to people about retention, employee engagement, whatever their background or nationality, to ensure that they understand what the company feels about them, what they're providing now, rather than what's going to happen in 18 months' time.
Steve, how about AMS? I mean, you're in all these, as you said last night at dinner, you're run by the Irish Mafia, and you're based in the UK. So how are you helping clients get ready?
So
or whatever it's going to be is probably an important thing to mention.
Yeah, I think, so historically we've always tried to work with organisations to help them understand the profile of their workforces and help them reorder work packages and maximise the effective outputs from the teams they have. And actually, Seb nailed it. The reality is no one knows what Brexit's all about yet, let alone the politicians that are trying to negotiate the trade deals. So I think all we can do is keep helping organisations get that visibility, and as more information becomes available, help them then react to the circumstances at the time. And I guess we've tried to make sure that our infrastructure supports our clients, both in the UK, Ireland, and wider EU, to support whatever challenges might be faced. But I guess ultimately we're going to have to react to the situation we find ourselves in when the politicians work it out.
Yeah, and we have all had such great experiences with politicians. So just quick show of hands, how many organizations here feel like they have even remotely gotten to the point where they have any clarity and can plan around the eventuality of Brexit? Does anyone feel that they're along the path of having an answer as to what to do? If you do feel like you're well on your way to planning it? Raise your hands. Okay, so obviously it's a very confusing time for everyone. So let's move on. We talked about a research study this morning about the revenue loss in open sales territories. So I'm going to go to John, who's you were a sponsor of the study, but not necessarily pertinent to the study. What's one way you help clients connect to business models, which I think is the next frontier in HR?
I think first is making sure they've identified it and people are knowledgeable about what the business and the company they work for are really trying to accomplish. I'm always surprised how sometimes that doesn't translate down throughout an organization. And once that's the case, you start realizing most companies can't do it without talent. And the need of urgency, and we talked a little bit about time to fill and open positions and what that does to an organization. And so getting them to see on the good side of what would happen if they moved faster and they hired better, and then on the bad side of if they didn't. Seeing all those options, but for us, the most important thing is giving them the knowledge. I think that is a miss that happens sometimes in the recruitment world, where an agency or somebody can promise the world and never delivers, rather than making sure that you have educated clients and educated partners.
All right, Michael, what do you think? People Scout.
John's got a good point. It's sharing the data so they understand what the issue is. And what we've found is that some clients are either completely oblivious to it, and you're just serving the mass need, whereas others are so sophisticated that they've come back to us and said, we want a graduated payment schedule. The longer it takes you to fill our roles, the less we want to pay you for those roles, because they're recognizing what it's costing them when the time to fill goes up, trying to add a sort of an incentive to how we approach it. We're open to those kind of discussions because at least it begins to demonstrate that they're looking at what's the impact of the hiring decisions, which isn't always in the control of the RPO. How long is the hiring manager taking to make their decision? How long does it take to go through the background check process? So it becomes a more collaborative kind of exercise when you can get somebody to actually recognize what that impact is.
Okay, so, does anyone have a comment or a question? Because I'm just going to call on somebody eventually. So, all right, well, we'll get there. I'm going to jump around a little bit. Innovation's an overused term, okay? I want you to name one aspect of RPO that will be obsolete in 10 years. And one aspect that not everyone uses today that will be absolutely necessary in 10 years. I'm going to go to Alex on this one. Alex?
Something that's going to be obsolete in 10 years. Good question. Not one that I prepared for, but thank you, Elliot, for the curveball.
Yeah. I never promised you a rose garden.
So I'm not sure there will be things that will be obsolete, but I think that as competition pushes the boundaries of technology, I think it'll force some of those well-established pieces of technology to evolve. So if we take something like, let's say LinkedIn, for example, a lot of the technologies that you've seen and talked about, that Jan talked about earlier, are starting to find innovative ways to find candidates. We've all talked a lot about the fact that LinkedIn is something that we all rely on right now, but I think we will gradually, we will move away from that and, more towards physically picking up the phone and having direct contact with these candidates. Finding those candidates is no longer the challenge, it's about engaging. And I'm sure that LinkedIn will reinvent themselves in the same way that us as RPO providers will reinvent ourselves as well.
All right, Seb, what do you think? What's here but soon to be gone, and sort of gone but soon to be here?
I think as we see the continuing kind of march of various point solutions, technology solutions, bolt-ons to CRMs, ATS, as Jan spoke about earlier, lots of different opportunities to bolt technologies on. I think it's going to be interesting to see the development or not of the ATS as a solution and what that will look like in time. I think in the panel we had a year or so ago, people spoke about interviews being obsolete. I'm not necessarily convinced by that, but I think certainly they will have reshaped in the way we do that completely, and I think it will be far more automated, potentially far more on video and interactive than we currently see. So, but you're talking about 10 years. I'm not sure I really see 3 years ahead, let alone 10 years ahead, because things are moving so fast. So, yeah, who knows in 10 years' time?
So I want to just bounce off a comment that came. Alex talked about LinkedIn needing to reinvent itself, and I noticed that Brad and Kathy are sitting back here from LinkedIn. So I want to see, Brad. Do you think Alex is right?
Well, I'd say, first of all, attend the breakfast tomorrow morning. Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. You made comments you made about us continuously needing to reinvent ourselves. I've been in this business for 14 years. I worked at Career Builder for 10 of those. And I left Career Builder because that business was just on the opposite end of reinventing itself and innovating. And I think what some of the things that our CEO shared at Talent Connect this year around how we're going to approach a very changing workforce. And as we walked in before this session, we heard someone talking about AI, which we'll address tomorrow, and then also the shift towards contract independent workers versus full-time workforce. So as the marketplace and the workforce changes, as will LinkedIn.
So I get confused about AI because I live in Philadelphia, back in the United States, and I'm a basketball fan. So for us, AI is Allen Iverson. He was on the Olympic team, but hardly a technology unto himself. But on the subject of AI, let me ask the group a question, all right? So you're all successfully, and I know each firm is all successfully deploying artificial intelligence using robots. But God, there's been a lot of talk about AI. So I'm interested in an example of artificial intelligence from a human, okay? I want to hear the dumbest story you've got from something either a candidate or a client has said to you that you would label as artificial intelligence. Why don't we start with Michael, and we'll just work down the row.
I struggle with this one because you don't want to call your clients dumb, and you sure don't want to call your people dumb, which is not to say that there are not examples where AI has been misused. I mean, part of the challenge is that a lot of what we see still in the technology space in the HR industry is not actually AI, it's really machine learning, which means that somebody is telling the system how to change their algorithms. It's not as much done automatically as it is in other spaces. I think that maybe the most egregious one I heard of was it was a beauty contest, and they were using AI to judge the contestants, and because of the nature of the algorithm, certain groups were excluded from the definition of beauty and therefore excluded from the process. And that's one of the challenges that we see with AI, is watching to make sure that you're not building in those sort of biases that you're not prepared for. Not funny, but real.
That was a great answer, but you have no future in comedy.
Yeah.
Alex, give us a funny story.
Well, I was very disappointed not to get through to the next round of the pageant based on that. But no, I think there's probably an example I've got which a lot of people can resonate with, which was I used to work for a technology company in-house, and we developed some hiring manager training. And we deliberately encouraged a particular senior manager to come along and attend the training. And in the pre-gambit, asking people what they wanted to get out of the training course, this individual was one of those classic guys who'd been interviewing for 20 years and said, I know, I've made up my mind in the first 10 minutes of an interview, and they obviously have some kind of incredible artificial intelligence to make an assessment, in the absence of data, in the absence of competence-based interviewing, And this was somebody that, knowingly had significant attrition problems, in his organization, which we, worked back to the hiring decisions that this guy was making. So it was quite incredible that he would make a statement, proudly so, that he was capable of making a decision in the first 10 minutes.
Seb, how about you?
I'm not sure it's a funny story, but I'll tell you a story, which is about technology, I suppose. We in Cielo, we have a centre called the Impression Centre because we want to have a candidate care centre where candidates can actually call in and find out where they are in the process, ask any kind of silly questions that they may have, or any questions that are kind of last minute that they need to find out where's their interview, what they should wear, etc., etc. Now, we also hire for quite a lot of healthcare systems, and one of the Catholic healthcare systems in the US had a requirement to hire a nun. And the nun saw the advert in one of the papers and called into the candidate care centre to say, I want to apply for this job. And they said, fine, absolutely brilliant. If you just go online and submit your application. And she said, well, I don't have access to a computer. And they said, well, okay, if you just email in, if you go to a kind of a internet cafe and email in, I don't have an email. So our candidate care agent basically said, well, where are you? Found out where she was, went on to Google Maps. There are other map systems, I'm just saying Google Maps. And found out where the nearest internet cafe was, directed her there, got her in front of a computer, taught her how to actually open up an email account, once got the email account, got her logged onto the system, and she did her application. And the good news in the story is she actually got the job, which was fantastic. Yeah. The point for me around this is actually, no matter how much AI or technology you have in your business, there are always going to be the cases where you have to have that human intervention and you have to have that care, which actually makes the candidate feel better about it. And I think sometimes we are in this mad rush to automate, and maybe we can automate 95% of it, but we've really focused around the human element as well and making that really matter.
John, how about you? What great stories up?
A funny and crazy story. We were giving a pitch to a bank in the southern United States maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and it was a very old bank with the room we were in was very large. There's about 30 stakeholders from this bank in the presentation, and we speak for an hour and a half and feel like everyone's engaged, and the CHRO says, I just have one question, and said, are these jobs going to be on the interweb? And I had no idea what she meant. I assumed it was their internal intranet system. And then I said, well, we can put them there. And she replied, so this will be on the Google machine as well. And I thought, I don't know if this is really a client we want to be working with here. And so,
I don't get it, John.
well, I mean, Steve, I mean, we all...
In Manchester, that's what we
we're not, I know, we're not allowed to have a keg in Manchester.
All right, Steve, can you email this in through the interweb for us?
Yeah, so I'm not sure this is necessarily to do with artificial intelligence, but we do a lot of work with Rolls-Royce. We hire around 9,000 people a year for them worldwide. And every day we break about 15 people's hearts. So we do a lot of work with them in terms of penetrating their brand into the marketplace and trying to make people aware that actually it's not the car manufacturer, it's the company that puts the engines on airplanes. And every day we get it, and it amazes me the lengths that people go to. We get these kind of video production packs that candidates send in where they've gone down to the local Rolls-Royce dealerships and they've taken selfies in the cars and they've got the salesman to let them have a little drive in the car. And then we have to say, well, actually, that's not the same company. So I guess the story there is that no matter how much time and effort we invest in gamification, AI, selection techniques, there are some folk who are always going to ignore that.
All right, you're Michelle Adams. I saw you earlier. You wanted like a big award for heading talent at O2, I think. Yeah, no, that's great. Do you have a question? All right, excellent. Why don't you ask a question?
Thank you very much. The 21st century workforce, I guess we all know, is an infinitely increasingly diverse sort of picture of people. Talk of gender diverse shortlists is kind of commonplace now. Obviously, I talked a little bit about, career returners. How do we engage, people with disability? How do we improve our sort of ethnic mix, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of different walks of life who I think we have to increasingly engage with more positively, more actively. And I just wondered, from your perspective, that's quite hard, and I wonder what responsibility you see you have and what responsibility you would place on companies in your experience. How open-minded are you? How open-minded are we to sort of thinking differently about what good looks like? That wasn't very succinct, sorry.
Yeah, how'd you get that award? Anyway, no, it was a good question. Before we go to the 21st century workforce, and I want to answer the question, I want to point out one quick thing about artificial intelligence. Everybody, first of all, on diversity, everybody on the panel, excepting John Wilson, reports to a woman. I just want you to know that, okay? So, we can see who they sent, but we know who's in charge, okay? Secretly running the world. Now, the problem is, they all just cheated. Did you see it? Because see, secretly in bars, I know this, they tell stories about stupid candidates and stupid clients. John was a little brave. He sort of went out there with the interweb story. I'll give him that much for John. But the reality is, the problem with artificial intelligence is we will forgive it in humans, but not in machines. So we always talk about what machines cannot do, without ever thinking about what humans cannot do. I find this fascinating when you think about it. It's almost like it's biological discrimination, okay? In a weird way, everyone's always talking about, well, we don't have a robot that can do everything, and then you start watching movies like Terminator and you realize that could be dangerous. But the reality is, there's a lot that robots can do, and yet people still resist it. I want you to think about that. Artificial, we can all think of something someone's done that's dumb. I can think of a lot of things I've done that are dumb just in the last 24 hours. But machines, artificial intelligence, maybe they screw up something, they reroute something wrong, that's unforgivable. When a human does it, we go to err is human, to forgive is divine. So, 21st century workforce. Who wants to tackle that one? Diversity. Michael, go ahead.
Well, sure. I got two questions. I heard two questions there. The first is, how would an RPO bring the diversity to the company, and then in return, what's the company's responsibility once the slate's in front of them? So this is something that we do on a regular basis. We have metrics around it. We're held accountable for it, attempting to do it in a blind way, because very often we're not seeing the person. We're going off of name and voice, going to the kind of sites that might engender diversity, the kind of audience that those sites cater to. That's the way that we're capturing the candidates. And what we say very clearly to our clients is that we're happy to be responsible for achieving a slate. We cannot be responsible, and you need to partner with us, for what the ultimate hire is, because that's where the visual comes in, and that's where the tendency is to hire like. And we've even had situations where the senior management has come to us and said, well, look, this is what the results are, and we say, yeah, and here's what the results are in terms of what we're giving you. What you need to do is look at what you're doing with what we're giving you to make a decision on where is the issue. Is it that we're not providing quality candidates, and we can have a conversation if you think the candidates we're providing are not quality? If you're seeing equal quality candidates but making a certain kind of a decision, then there's a different kind of discussion you need to have internally.
Anyone else?
I think it's about being authentic with the company, as not so much the candidates, but how are they perceived as a place that's welcoming? If you can put everything over on the website of pictures of everything that looks like it's the United Nations, but at the end of the day, is that person going to feel comfortable in that environment? And so we spent a lot of time surveying two different groups that were a candidate pool for one of our clients. And the thing that they said they were evaluating, and the survey is only on how they viewed the client, what they were evaluating the most is that if they felt comfortable there. And I think when we look at just ourselves as human beings, when you go into an environment and you're either comfortable or you're uncomfortable. And companies can do that to candidates. So I think it's really an organization's job to look in the mirror. It's our job to tell them they need to.
Anyone else want to take a stab at that one?
I think from my perspective, I've kind of had the privilege of working in a diversity role and actually being involved in some of the staffing for the London Organising Committee of the Olympic Games back in 2012, which for those of you remember, it kind of prided itself on being the most diverse games ever. And I was kind of, exposed to really inspirational kind of practices. But I think, for me, a big part of recruitment is you have to be able to kind of, manage the expectations of the candidates that you're talking to. The worst thing you can possibly do, again, comes back to the authenticity, is say that we're the most diverse organisation ever, and then they come in and the reality is very, very different. And I think what stood out for me is that the diversity messaging came right from the very top. It wasn't about a tick box exercise. It was genuinely wanting to reach out to the most diverse population possible. Again, I was fortunate to sit in on one of the board sessions, and just the diversity, and most importantly, across all strands, not just one. I think certainly in my experience, a lot of the clients that we deal with tend to focus on gender diversity, seems to be the natural one. Now, maybe that's because I've been involved with a lot of technology clients who tend to focus on women in technology. But, they looked at all of the strands in equal importance. And I think, if we need to try and embrace that, we need to understand the culture of the organisation, we need to communicate that outwardly, we need to become that organisation. I think that's really important.
So, and by the way, I was at the 2012 Olympics. I actually spoke a couple places. I was representing the fat old white guy demographic, and I might say very well. The reality is that, part of the thing about the workforce is, everyone acts like they have a choice, but you really don't. The labor pool is well beyond your control. It is what it is. So everything about the 21st century workforce is about what you're going to pick out of the pot of labor that's available in your area. And when you accept the fact you don't have control, it will set you free. And you'll realize that this is what's good, what's bad, whatever. Well, John gave an example earlier of a client who actually refuses to discuss diversity, and they're the most diverse company you work with.
Yep.
They just say, hey, we don't focus on it, we don't try to measure it, we just hire people who are great, and the people turn out to be diverse. Think about that. There's a message in that story.
Yeah.
So,
I think, Elliot, if I can just add, I think that's a great point. It's about identifying talent, irrespective of the disguise that the talent comes in. Given the transparency that John talked about, encouraging the hiring communities to ignore the disguise that the talent comes in, and just identify the talent. And I think that sounds easy, but that's a really, really big challenge. Really big challenge.
all right, so I want to get us out of here at a reasonable time so we can get to the Guinness Storehouse party sponsored by Korn Ferry Future Step. So we're going right to the lightning round, okay? Each of you give me a 1-minute explanation why you are a great partner to pick for talent acquisition or talent management services. Start with Mr. Leach.
Oh.
You thought you were going to be last. I can see that on your face, but now we're going to go to you first.
That's okay. Hey, listen, do you know what? Honestly, Elliot, I guess we'll all say similar things. I think we've got great people, we've got great process, we're passionate about doing what we do, but fundamentally, we're not a great partner for all organizations. Actually, the organizations that we partner with have to have a similar culture to us and have to want to go on a similar journey to the journeys that we want to go on with them. And I think organizations have to invest the time in finding out whether we're right for them as much as we have to find out whether they're right for us.
John?
Steve could have just said that, and it could have came out of my mouth. I think that's very true. You've really good group of companies and leaders up here that care. I mean, and I think that's a common theme among this entire group, and that's why there's so few companies in the world that really do what we do, because you cannot be fake, and you can't do things that aren't authentic. And so when you look at a multi-billion-dollar industry and there's 15 companies in the world that do it, it's because it's really hard to get into if you're not authentic and real.
Seb.
Well, this is just going to sound like an echo chamber. You know, totally agree. I think, you know, I think to Steve's point, I think it's really important to work with the right companies, and it's important for the companies to work with the right RPO where you get that affinity, the cultural match, and the alignment. I would say that from a CLO's point of view, we're really focused on companies who see talent as an asset and a differentiator in their market, not just a commodity. And there are companies out there who still see talent as a commodity, and we're not the partner for those types of companies. So anywhere that we can go in and make a difference, partner, think long term, not think reactively in the short term, but really think about making a difference, then yeah, that's who we're a great partner for.
How about you, Alex?
Yeah, so I'm in danger of, as I say, saying the same thing. But no, look, I think from my perspective, you know, we all know each other fairly well, and we compete on a daily basis. But I think the competition just breeds, you know, technology advancements, and you know, we all sit here with, you know, a broad kind of talent spectrum in terms of our service deliverables, but you know, technology that underpins it, and they've all got slightly different ways that they can enhance your organisations. And I agree, it's about what's the most important one to you from a priority perspective, in terms of the strategy of your organisation, in terms of the culture of your organisation. So yeah, I agree with the
How about you, Michael?
colleagues.
I'm not going to repeat everything they said. What I'm going to add to that is that you can count on us to tell you that we're not a good fit. We're at the risk of not getting all the business that maybe we could otherwise. We're pretty honest about what we're capable of doing and what we're not, and where it's a fit and where it's not. And that's, I think, a hallmark of a good partner. Where is it going to work?
Thank you. Let me just point out one thing, and I think Seb said it, and John said it, and everyone has said it up here. There are only a handful of companies that can do this at the level that the companies up here can do. They all have subtle nuances and differences in the services they perform, but more importantly, cultural fit's important, being able to build a relationship, okay? Because when you're in the first year of a long-term program, you're gonna go through what I call the 4 stages of implementation, okay? They're shock, you know, anger, grief, and acceptance, okay? It's hard to do implementation, and if you have the right relationship and the right cultural fit, you get through that and build really great long-term relationships, which all these companies have done. So it's really important as you look at your partners, you look at specific capabilities and also cultural fit. So, you know, thank you, gentlemen. We're going to tie up now, but please a big round of applause for Michael Yinger, Alex Onofrio, Seb Connell, John Wilson, and Steve Leach.